Hi everyone, I just finished watching the video between Darth Microtransactions, GhazzyTV, and Jonathan and Mark from GGG. And I wanted to give you guys a bullet point overview of what was talked about, mainly covering what I thought was relevant to players needing to know going into the next patch, as well as some information that I felt was just interesting to know that is on GGG's radar, to make it so that people don't have to watch a 2-hour-long video. I don't know if people even are interested in this type of content, if they'd rather just watch a 2-hour-long video. But do me a favor, if you do find this video interesting and you want to see more of this type of content, let me know. Like, write it in the comment section, or like or subscribe to the video. That way I know, okay, people actually want me to do this type of content. Because otherwise I have no idea. And if I just go by the video metrics and it doesn't get a lot of interaction, then I'm like, okay, well, community doesn't like this type of content, and fair enough, but that way I just know how to allocate my time best. Because right now we're basically mostly making videos around skill gems and skills and build guides, stuff like that. So if you liked this type of content where we're giving overviews of big giant patches or interviews, so you can get kind of the gist of what it is without actually having to watch a 2-hour-long video, just let me know, please. All right, so without further ado, let me bring up my notes here, and we'll kind of go everything line by line. So the first thing that was talked about is we already know when the patch is going to be released, but they wanted to know what time the patch notes were going to be released. They talked about releasing it to Wednesday or Thursday, depending on their time zone. So hopefully we'll have it in the next day or two. They're going to be adjusting Magic Find by essentially, quote unquote, nerfing it. They haven't released any type of definitive values, but they did mention that they're going to be subject to diminishing returns, which is odd because I thought they already were. So they made some examples like, if you've got 400 Magic Find and you're like, I'm going to get 1,000 Magic Find, it's so heavily diminished that you might see like a 3% return. So nerfing your character into the ground for a 3% return in rarity is just, I don't know, kind of silly. So you'll have to make that decision for yourself. So what this means for the player is that early on, if you find any magic rarity of items found gear, it'll be impactful. With lower quantities, you'll feel it, but scaling it super high, you're not going to feel that much more items dropping for you. So just be aware of that going into the next league. They talked about the trial bosses, how the bosses had double like values, and they're going to be reducing those, so they're cut in half to fix that. They also want to improve the randomness and the variety in it. So they didn't exactly say exactly what's going to be changed in these encounters in the trials. So we'll have to wait and see. However, they did mention that the Sanctum boss's hourglass mechanic is going to be hopefully overhauled. They did acknowledge the fact that the little hourglass thing on your first time going through, you have no idea what it is or how to interact with it, and then you just ended up like, okay, trying to avoid them. Oh, I don't want to, I think they're bombs, don't touch them, and then you just exploded and died. That was kind of lame, with no indicators as to what you did wrong. So if you didn't figure it out, the next time you went in there, you just died again until you figured out, oh, I'm supposed to touch them. So they did acknowledge that was a problem, so that should get changed and fixed. They talked about the pinnacle bosses having their health values reduced for tier 0. That way, if you're just starting out or playing a non-meta build, it'll be more accessible to you to experience the fight and everything like that. You'll still be able to, increase the difficulty of the boss. So if you're a player that wants to make it +6 and still murder the boss in 6 seconds or whatever, they're still going to allow for builds to get really, really strong and handle the content in under 15 seconds. But just like it is now, you're going to have to invest quite a lot to make that possible. They're not looking to completely eliminate that, just to put it on your radar. They've also made it about twice as easy to access this content. So like splinters and the fragments and stuff like that, instead of taking on average like 60 maps to gather all the resources to engage in these fights, you'll now be able to do it in about 30. The next one is nerfs to Temporalis. Temporalis' cooldown reduction is no longer completely eliminating the blink cooldown. Reducing skill cooldown is still going to be really strong. It just won't be as busted as it is now, making you, fly across the map at ridiculous speeds. And they're also making it so that the relic for Temporalis drops 10 times less is often, so it'll be more rare. They're also making changes to map sustain mechanics, so the boss is going to be guaranteed to drop you a map, and also the last rare monster that you kill is also going to drop a rare map. So for players that were finding it difficult to sustain their maps, it's going to be substantially easier now. Next, onto Rogue Exile scaling. So players were concerned that there was not going to be any scaling to these, so you enter like a tier 0 map and all of a sudden, you know, a tier 15 rogue gets in there and then one taps you and you're like, man, it sucks. So the Rogue Exile will scale based on the tier of the map that you're in, along with their uniques that they're wearing. Also, the Rogue Exiles won't be carrying any boss-specific uniques, so you're not going to be getting like an Ingenuity belt out of a Rogue Exile, although the other uniques can drop from them. And the frequency to which they're going to appear in your maps is about a 1 in 12. The next thing is they're going to be making adjustments to the mana cost of spells, decreasing the scaling from 12 to 9. This should make it so that higher level gems, as you get higher than your level 19, 20, 21s, it'll make it easier to be able to handle using those spells. They talked about how like once you have, let's say, level 19 gem and you got like +5 to your skill through your amulet or whatever your gear, that they wanted you to still be able to use a skill. Like you don't want to hit a threshold where you have attribute requirement going way out of control or resource requirement going way out of control and then you just couldn't use it. So they're going to be reducing the amount of scaling for that to make it easier for you to deal with a higher level skill gem. The next thing is making the drop rate of the items necessary or needed to encounter the bosses like Oroth, Audience of the King, and then the Simulacrum stuff. They're going to make it easier to acquire those. This means the next patch, it's going to be a lot easier to find the Audience with the King. So you won't have to be as frightened to, you know, attempt the fight. You don't have to fear for dying. Because a lot of times right now, they're weighing, okay, should I sell it or should I fight it? It's so infrequent to fight it that it's worth a lot. So I'll make a lot of currency by selling it, or I can chance doing it. And if I die, I lose it, right? So if it's much easier to find them, then at least you'll have an easier time deciding whether you'd rather sell it or just run it yourself. That's my hope. Next up is the Ingenuity belt. It has been nerfed. They haven't released the exact values, like how bad it was nerfed. So that's yet to be seen in the patch notes, but just know that it has. The Jeweler Orbs accessibility, they're going to increase the frequency of the drop rate. And they've also changed it so the perfect one is going to be able to give you the previous gem slot. So instead of having to get like the regular one and the greater one and the perfect one, if you have the perfect one, it'll give you all the other slots. So that's cool. Then they're going to be making some visual clarity enhancements as to rare monsters and magic monsters to make it more apparent that you're fighting them. It'll make it more obvious which ones are rare and which ones are magic. They're going to be making some adjustments to the intensity of the Delirium Fog, which I'm a massive fan of because at the end game, you're pretty much making all of your maps delirious. And so sometimes what happens is the fog is too thick or it changes your map, like the color of it. Like if you put the map, if you press tab and you make the map overlay, it's hard to see like where you're going. Also, it's hard to see certain on-death effects or even just spells in general. And they can make it cumbersome to play through a delirious map that way. So they've identified this. In the video, they said that they've changed the values on some of these already. And so to what extent, we don't know yet. So, but just know that they understand it's a problem and they'll be making improvements to that during this patch. Now on to the things that I just found interesting during the stream and that I think you might just be interested in knowing so that you know that it's on their radar are things like block mechanic. They were asked like what's the goal with block mechanic, and they talked about they wanted to make it so that more players had an incentive to block. They talked about giving payoff, so you'll block and then something will happen afterwards. The way that I think would be the only reason why I would use it, or maybe not the only reason, but the way I'd be most incentivized to use block is if I had a period of invulnerability afterwards, or at least like heavy increased defenses afterwards. Because if I jump into a pack of mobs and I kill them, and let's say I killed most of them being like melee mobs and there's like range mobs shooting at me, the second I drop that block, I'm going to now take a ton of damage incoming. Or if I jumped into mobs and hit them and then I block afterwards, the second I drop the block, whether I kill them or not, I'm going to take damage. So I don't want to drop the block. Like, I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm going to be hit by a ton of monsters and then drop block and then get hit and I'm going to die. So if they made it so when I drop block, I had like a frame where I can hit an attack, or like your next attack, you're invulnerable, and then I can re-put my block, or I can jump back or whatever, then that would make sense. I'm just talking about endgame. I'm just thinking if I'm on a tier 18 map and I rolled a bunch of modifiers, monsters are faster, monsters do more damage, crazy crit damage, and I jump into that and I'm blocking and I draw block and there's monsters shooting at me, the likelihood of you dying is really high. So I don't know if they're looking to do that. I know they've said having you increase damage, like in the video they showed parry. So I don't know if they're going to do that with block, but just know that they're going to be making incentives for you to want to use block. They've talked about addressing broken builds. I understand that there's a need for balances, and they're looking into that. Their hope is that every single patch or every league, rather, they're going to have less and less broken builds. They made an example where, like, let's say now they have 150 broken builds. The next patch, maybe they have 100, and the next one after that, they have 50. So all these broken, quote-unquote, broken builds are on the radar, and they will look to balance them to make it so that there's more variance in the builds that everyone's playing. They talked about the on-death effect adjustment. So there are still some complaints with some on-death effects, like some mobs leaving some effects on the ground when you go and pick up loot after they die. This has happened to me, where I kill a mob and then I go over to loot their stuff, and then there's like an effect on the ground, then pop, I die. So they've talked about if there's enough complaints around some mechanics that are unfair, they're willing to change it. It's on the radar. We just need to voice our opinions, and they'll make adjustments as needed. In regards to crit damage, they didn't say that they had any immediate desires to change how it's working or the power of it. They do know that a lot of builds are using crit damage to scale their damage. It's going to be on their radar. If it proves to be that majority of builds, if not all of them, are using crit damage, then they'll adjust the values as needed to create class diversity. But just know that it is on the radar, but it's not going to be anything they're looking to change in this next patch. Their endgame philosophy in terms of their engaging in meaningful combat with their combos and stuff like that, they said they want to make it so it's more likely that you're going to be engaging with bosses, their boss mechanics, you can see their faces and stuff like that, but they still want to give the player the ability to be able to become like a god, right? So your first few encounters, which I thought was already the case, their first few encounters with a boss, you're going to see all their mechanics because you're going to be weak. But if I'm a month in or month and a half into the league and I've already acquired a ton of gear and I'm level 90 whatever, then I should be able to just steamroll the bosses. So that's still going to be possible, but they do want you to interact with it more, so they'll be looking to balance things appropriately for that. Next thing is some monsters have a push mechanic. So like they mentioned the Roas, or the little roly-poly guys, that they're able to just shove you across the map. They're going to be looking into how far they push you. It should maybe be like a shove. Some mobs, it's intended for them to push you because they want it to match kind of the animation. So if it looks like a target or a monster should be pushing you hard, to make it feel more impactful, they have to be adding that. So it's all contextualized, but they are going to reduce the amount. Like they don't want something sending you like halfway across the map, for example. Next thing is ailment versatility. They touched on how some skills have too high of a value of hit, so it's like the most optimal use of proccing ignites, big damage ignites or bleeds, and they're looking to address that by adding more variance. But they just said that it's on the radar. As to what that means and how it's going to be, what changes are going to be implemented in future patches is unknown, but they're looking into it. Same thing with ignite proliferation radius. It's not something they're looking to change now, but if enough of us request it, they said they'd be willing to change that. Cross skill weapons, like your ability to use, a staff. If you're a person that uses a wand, they said it's a no-go. They want you, if you're using a staff, they want you to use staff gems. If you're using a wand, they want you to be casting. So you won't see anything cross weapon. No cross weapon skills there. Boss specific uniques. They said that whenever they introduce new bosses, there'll be new uniques, but they're not going to be adding new uniques to currently bosses in the game. So if you're wondering, that's what's going on with that. For maps, they're looking to retune some maps. The Recombinator's role that we're talking about, like what their goal is with recombinators, like being able to take two items and merge them together. Their goal with that is to make it easier and more accessible for players to put like 2 to 4 desirable mods on an item. And it wasn't intended to make it so it's easier for players to have like the GG6 perfectly modded stats. So it's what this translates to a player is during the next league, you're probably going to be looking for like all items that have 1 to 2 mods on them, and you're looking for like the highest roll or tier 1 mod, so that you can get 1 or 2 mods on one item, 1 or 2 mods on another item, combine them for a chance to getting the ideal item. So for example, let's say you're I don't know, a melee guy and you want a high fizz. So maybe you're looking for your preferred weapon type to have a high fizz roll on one and maybe a flat damage roll on it, and then you can try to combine them to get both of them on a weapon. So the hope is to make it easier to like start off gearing yourself, but not so that you can get like the best item in the game and everyone can craft them. Next up, the rune mechanics for resistance swapping. It was talked about. They wanted to avoid making it so that you can change the resistances on your gear. So if you had an item that had fire resistance, they don't want you changing it to have cold resistance. They basically said that their philosophy on this was that they want you to use runes to change your resistances or to alter your character's overall resistances. So if you want to get more cold, it's not going to be by changing an already existing mod on your gear. It's going to be through using a rune. They talked about making improvements to the passive tree and the search functionality, so it'll be easier to find what you're looking for. And then lastly, they talked about what happens if you die in the hardcore league. And what's going to end up happening is when you die in hardcore, you're just going to go to that league's softcore. You're not going to go into the standard league, away from the league itself. You'll still be in the league, but instead of being hardcore, you'll just be in the softcore version. And that pretty much covers it. That's everything I thought was interesting and everything I thought that was relevant for the next patch and pertinent for you to know going into the next patch so you can make the best decisions possible. And that's it for me, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you enjoyed the video, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, comment at the bottom. Let me know what you thought of this. If you have any suggestions on how I can make these type of videos better, please let me know. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.